Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Zicast. I'm your host, Ryan Ziaks, and today I'm joined by sports journalist Grace Hand.
Hi there.
Yeah, awesome to have you, Grace. On my show, I interview people and get to know them better, and I'm hyped to learn more about you. So, how about you kick things off by telling us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course, and thank you so much for having me. I have a little bit of a fun background. Just kidding,
Hmm.
it's very boring. I started off as pretty much I feel like anyone who works in sports does, obsessed with sports since I was just a little kid watching with my parents. I grew up in Fairfield County, Connecticut, went to middle school, high school there, and then I went to college at Sacred Heart University, where I went to the sports media program up there. And when I graduated, I just wanted to spend a little more time in school before joining the real world, so to speak. So went across the country to Arizona State, got my master's in sports journalism there, continued to fall in love with what I do. And now I finally have a full-time job down here in Texas. I work for the Southern Texas section of the PGA as a digital content coordinator. So basically, all things golf, now my expertise. So I'm absolutely loving it and have loved where my life has led me so far.
Incredible, and I'm really excited to get into that journey. So, if you don't mind telling us, kind of at what moment did it click for you that sports could be something more than just a passion, that it's something you can build a career in?
Yeah, honestly, it took me longer than I thought it would looking back to realize that this is something that I could do for work. I never, going to school growing up, thought I was going to end up working in any sports related field. That was always kind of like my side passion of what I was doing at home or what I was doing as an athlete myself. It didn't really click until COVID when I actually signed to go to Sacred Heart and stumbled across their sports media program there that like this is something that I could get paid to do, and getting paid to do what you love is kind of like everyone's goal, right? So I didn't think about it at all until that moment, and then just that changed my whole life, and I never looked back after that.
Awesome. And what were some of the experiences you were able to have in the sports media program that were really formative for you?
Yeah, so I was actually an athlete in college as well. So
Mm.
it was kind of an interesting dynamic to be able to work in the athletics department and also be one of the athletes that were being represented. But from that sports media department, I had so many opportunities from like colleagues and professors, and I was just able to kind of say yes to everything. So I started out working broadcasts, kind of behind the camera or in the control room and just kind of getting a look as to what things are on TV that you wouldn't know just by watching them. And then was able to kind of work my way up to different positions and kind of experiment and see what I loved to do while also being able to play my sport at the same school and just have a lot of community pride. So that was something that was always so important to me to have that kind of connection between the community I was representing and then myself as a member of that community.
And what was that dynamic like being an athlete, but also having the perspective of knowing sports media? Did that change anything for you?
I wouldn't say it changed everything. I think it really helped me appreciate everything more.
Mm.
I always, when I, especially working in any kind of writing or reporting, it's made me kind of fall in love with like underrepresented sports a little bit. Because obviously a lot of people go to school and like they want to work with the football team. At Sacred Heart, it became they want to work with the hockey team. But I love to kind of focus on sports that didn't get as much attention, which kind of led me to in my last year at Sacred Heart, I was able to be like the main photographer for the baseball team, which they didn't even have a field on campus at the time, which is starting to change now finally. But they never really got that much attention from the department because of how removed they were. So when I kind of had the chance to take that as like my own personal pet project, I jumped on it. And it was cool to see how appreciative the athletes could be of someone just like giving them a little bit of love and like just like cool things that they didn't receive before. And I've kind of carried that through, especially at Arizona State as well. I was able to cover high school swimming, which was something that they never had reporters there. So it was cool to see that kind of light for the athletes when they're able to like get recognition for all their hard work. And that's my sport was fencing in college, which is very niche sport. Not a lot of people do or know about it. So I also understood what it feels like to be at a school that doesn't really look at your sport as serious as some other sports. So that's just been something that I've been personally really passionate about throughout my career so far.
And what would your pitch be to anybody to watch fencing since you want to advocate for underrepresented sports?
I would say that anyone who hasn't watched fencing, it can be very intimidating to look at on paper in terms of the rules, but if you've watched any entertainment or pop culture thing like Star Wars, like Princess Bride, you already appreciate the sport of fencing because that's kind of the whole plot line of those movies. And it really is almost exactly, minus the, gore, almost exactly what you see in some of those movies. And it's a lot more fun than you think. I would also encourage anyone to try fencing because it's a blast. So just
Hmm.
FYI.
I'm sure a lot of, I'm sure it teaches you a lot in terms of reflexes, technique. I remember from high school, I used to do track and we would sometimes share the gym with the fencing team. So I got to know some of the players. It is a very interesting art if you want to elaborate on that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that not to get all like preachy, but I think that like sports and art are very interconnected, and a lot of people kind of want to separate them in whatever argument that they're having. I think that from the beginning of time that there's always been art to sport. Like if you look at ballet, if you look at sports like fencing, if you look at even what I do like as a photographer, as someone who works in content, like I'm sitting here taking the art parts and the aesthetic parts of sport and translating that into something that people want to consume and be entertained by. And I think that on every level, it's just always connecting. Um, so it's also so fun to kind of find those connections and find what makes sports so artistic and then be able to translate that into something that doesn't just feel as separate as it may to some people.
That's something I've noticed a lot is that people look for the same things in sports that they look for in art. When you look for it, look at the ups and downs of a game. It's the same thing we look for in a story structure. So, and that's something that you're able to do so much through sports media. And I'm also curious, since we talked about you being an athlete and then also working in sports media, what was the dynamic like when you're dealing with other athletes that you kind of know their mindsets?
Yeah, first of all, busy. It was busy to deal with on the court, but especially when I was phased out of my own athlete time, I think it helps to kind of understand how to approach people who maybe aren't so outgoing or talkative. Like a lot of people really understand and appreciate when you come at them with a level of respect to them as an athlete and not just like the general like I'm here to do my job and that's that. I've always found it so much easier to get people to open up to me because I can approach them, talk to them about their performance, and like clearly love and understand what I'm doing. And I think that people really respond to that really well. Coaches, athletes, like even other reporters, other journalists can understand your passion and want to kind of help you further that, maybe more than someone it feels like you're just checking off a box because you have to be there for work. And I think that a huge part of that for me is because I was an athlete and I understand how much like time and effort people put into their sport and just how much they want to be recognized for doing all of that. Like they don't want it to be for nothing, even if it's not reflected in maybe how the game turns out or how a match turns out or if they're injured or something like that. So I think that kind of understanding that mindset in any capacity has helped guide my journey.
And people can always feel those levels of passion and enthusiasm when you bring it, and all it does is just add to the athletes and add to the game itself. And I know kind of through your work, you're able to do kind of a mix of on-air work and a lot of behind the scenes. Can you tell us about how those compare?
I think it's hard to compare like being on camera versus being behind the scenes just because at their core, it's so different to be in both, even though they're both in the same like industry and the same vibe. Um, I will say that I've loved every opportunity that I've been able to stumble across in this field. I think that they're all so worthwhile to me. From those two different pieces of it, I think I've really been able to get a full and complete understanding of kind of how sports media works, especially like live event sports media. I think that every single broadcast I've done in a different role has kind of put a different piece to the puzzle of being able to be better at my job as a reporter or be better at my job as a broadcaster or even be better at my job and how I can help like my colleagues and how I can help other people. And it just makes me a better storyteller to know how everything is put together, like from start to finish, and not just popping in at like one part of the timeline or another. So I would always be such a big proponent for anyone looking into sports media as a reporter to do both sides at some point in their career. Because I think it just makes you a better and more well-rounded like candidate and a better and more well-rounded reporter.
And I'm also curious. I know you've been able to do a lot of variety in the terms of your sports coverage, whether it be at Sacred Heart or when you did your graduate or your grad school at Arizona State. Can you take us into some of that and how and what that was able to teach you as a storyteller in sports?
Yeah, absolutely. As I kind of mentioned, I'm like from Connecticut, and then I went
Mhm.
to school in Connecticut, Sacred Hearts in Fairfield County as well. And this does answer your question, I promise. I feel like the diversity of experience of being in two completely different places for school is what I was looking for when I decided to go to Arizona State for my master's. And I think that it ties in to what I said before about how having all of these different pieces of the puzzle like makes me who I am as a storyteller is that I would always want that experience of being somewhere different with like maybe people I don't relate to as much, or at least people I haven't been around as much in terms of athletes. Like one of the biggest surprises when I moved to Arizona and was doing high school sports from Connecticut, someone from the Northeast, is that lacrosse is not a high school sanctioned sport in Arizona. It's all club. So obviously where I'm from in the Northeast, lacrosse is probably one of the biggest high school sports that we have in Connecticut, at least in my part of Connecticut. So that's something that kind of taking that into consideration, okay, as someone who loves to tell the underrepresented story, well, let me look at lacrosse because there are still kids playing and they're trying to get that sport to be on the same level as like football or even hockey is just starting to be a high school sport out there. And I think that that's something that I never, it wouldn't have ever really crossed my mind had I not left and started to try something new, and expanded my skills that way because I was able to do some projects and understand some people that I even went to school with who had played lacrosse, and we would all kind of debate what's the best way to elevate a sport from something that's starting to be more popular into something that people can actually play and like have funding for. Um, so that's something that was so interesting, being able to move like that. And again, like I said, like something that I never would have been able to stumble across had I not had those two vastly different experiences, even if it wasn't for the schooling perspective.
And what would you say is the best way to help build up a sport from something that's new to a name brand?
Building a sport up from kind of I guess the bottom up. This is something I've looked into a lot. I'm big into hockey. That's been the main portion of what I did all through school was hockey broadcasting, hockey social media. It's been a big focus of mine. And I think that what's so important is, first of all, awareness. Like people need to understand that this is something that kids love to do. I think the biggest thing in Arizona that I noticed was that the major teams in the area would really feed into youth programs. So the Arizona Coyotes, when they were still in Phoenix, had a lot of like training camps, like funding given to junior hockey players in the area. They would like pour money into local rinks and things like that. Now, with a sport like lacrosse, that's a little bit harder because like the PLL is just not as big as like the NHL is and things like that. But I think that the first step would be awareness that this is a struggle that people want to keep moving up on. And then the second thing has to be money. You have to figure out where can we get support for these youth sports that make it more accessible, because that's a big stepping stone is how accessibility is. There are a lot of sports that have really big paywalls. that makes it so fewer kids are able to just kind of casually play. I think it's why soccer is such a global sport because you can just kind of walk outside with a bunch of friends and go to a field and have a ball and you can just play soccer. There's not really a whole lot of equipment to just straight up play the game. Whereas sports like lacrosse, hockey, you need ice. Like some half the country doesn't get ice most of the time. You know, you can't just go out on a pond in Texas. So it's stuff like that, that there just has to be ways to bridge that accessibility to get more kids able to play the sport. And then once you have those numbers, you can kind of pitch that higher and higher until it grows.
Kind of like you noted, climate has a play on it too. It's something one of my friends joked once that warm weather places shouldn't have hockey. I'm curious what you think about that because they don't have to go through the struggles of the cold.
Yeah, I would say that I kind of have grown to feel the opposite.
Mhm.
Again, I'm from New England, like New
Mhm.
Englander through and through. Plenty of people played pond hockey growing up in the winter and everything like that. But when I was down in the desert in Arizona, like there was a huge presence. Like they were very, very dedicated and devoted to like hockey. And there was the ASU Division One team is pretty new in terms of Division One hockey teams. It was only elevated, don't quote me on it, but I want to say like 8 seasons ago, something pretty recent. Um, and they've started to be really good, and this whole like hockey in the desert campaign has really taken off down there. And I think that anywhere that there's people who love the sport, regardless of whether you're playing inside, outside, whether you grew up skating or if you kind of like picked it up later on, like there's always going to be that interest for hockey. And I think that that's such like a beautiful thing to see it be more passion than convenience, if that makes any sense. Like more, you have to beat more barriers to be a hockey player down south than you would to just be like in Minnesota or Massachusetts, where it's just so prevalent in the community.
You feel like you have to prove yourself more, so to speak, that you're a viable place for this to happen and you have viable players. That's kind of what I summarize that to be.
Exactly, exactly.
I'm curious if there was a specific moment when you realized you wanted to champion kind of underrepresented sports in this way, or sports people wouldn't think of in certain places or areas with certain people.
Yeah, I would say that it probably dates back to my time at Sacred Heart. I worked on the school newspaper for a journalism class for a semester, and I did a lot of writing. And two of my articles, actually, I would say three at the time, though the women's hockey team became much bigger at when I graduated. Um, but three of the sports that I wrote for were women's hockey, women's bowling, and women's wrestling. And these are all three sports that are very good at Sacred Heart. Like they're very win conference championships, like represent on the national level. And they did not get the same kind of attention as like the football team or the basketball team, which weren't as consistently showing up in terms of like medals and all that. Um, and kind of seeing how just bringing a little bit of publicity could like make those athletes feel just made me feel like I was doing like a greater service than just reporting on like a game. And I think that kind of like higher level or higher calling has kind of spoken to me ever since of like why am I doing what I'm doing? It's not just to like straight report. I don't really see the need for that because anyone can watch a game or read a game recap. Like I want to go a little bit deeper as to why does this matter?
Because it's kind of like a calling, so to speak, to you that, of course, kind of like what you said, a lot of these sports have received so much coverage, but the ones that you're kind of going after, it's kind of not to put words in your mouth, but more of a challenge, more of a I feel like it'd be more fulfilling in the end, would you say?
Exactly. I would agree with that. I always have loved a challenge. In pretty much every aspect of my life, I'm very competitive. So I
Mhm.
like to do things that aren't just handed to me so easily. And I think that does kind of come into fruition like in this capacity is like I like to do things that maybe haven't been done or haven't been done the same way because I don't see the point in me being here and doing my job in the same way that everyone else has always done it because that's just like you already have these things. Why not have something a little bit new or a little bit unique?
I'm curious if you don't mind kind of taking us through like the day to day of when you're working on a broadcast in terms of your preparation and the things that you look out for now having so much experience with so many different sports and things like that. Just take us through what that looks like for you.
Oh yeah, I wish I could be one day. No, just kidding. I would say the most recent sport that I broadcasted was football for the University of New Haven. I was a sideline reporter, so I'll do a little bit of like a recap of what that was like. I would say that a lot of the focus is preparation, as you said. So I would probably spend the week before the broadcast from whatever the previous game that they played until the game that I was actually going to work. Um, Looking for stories. That's the sideline reporter job is going to be what's the story that's not just the game. So I try and find either a standout player from the previous game, like someone was coming back from injury that was important, maybe something unique about the coaching staff or the other team that they played, and just really dive into long, long articles and clicking through things that maybe don't make any sense and kind of really familiarize myself with like why this game matters. And then obviously also the basic broadcast techniques of you have to know everyone's names, like kind of recognize numbers, make sure you pronounce everything correctly. So that would also be included in making sure my like prep sheet had all that information. So on the game day, I was really prepared. And then the actual game itself, I'm as like talent on a broadcast, you're not there as long as the people working behind the scenes, right? So you only have to be there for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours before the broadcast starts, and then kind of pretty soon after everything wraps up, you can go. I would like to get there as early as I can and just kind of like talk to people or just observe and see if I could see anything that maybe I wasn't aware of or anything that I could kind of spark interest and tell an interesting story to the viewer. That's not just like this person had this many catches today, which is still important information, but it's just always what more can you add from an entertainment value, from a human value. And then I will say, for me personally, anytime that I work a broadcast or I'm on camera, I feel like I just kind of am so zoned in for the actual time that I'm like live or on a broadcast that I probably could not tell you a single thing that happens or that is said to me or that I say that whole time. I don't know if that's unique to me in terms of broadcasting, but it's kind of like a huge like blackout spot until the game is over. Um, so it goes quick, always goes quickly for me. And then I would say the biggest part about a day to day for broadcasting is I try and talk to as many people as I can. Not even when it comes to the actual game. Like I'm talking photographers on the field, like coaches from the other team, like literally anybody that I come into contact with is, I don't want to say like a potential friend, but like a potential friend. Like I like to speak to people, get to know them, get to know me, and that kind of like opens some more doors as a reporter later on. If someone like recognizes you as a friendly face, they might be more willing to be like, oh, I'll talk to her, like, oh, let me let her into this spot, then maybe I'd be a little iffy about like if it was someone else. And I think that that's something I always focus on is making those connections with people.
I've always felt that the best journalists are very inquisitive in the sense of doing exactly what you do, going around and talking to people, getting a lay of the land, so to speak, but also a feel for the people that you're covering throughout that entire day and the people that you're working for. And I'm also curious, because I was introduced to you through your sick media account where I see you with your microphone interviewing different players. Take us through an interview like that because I know it's kind of a fast process after a game, especially if you're interviewing the losing team. Take us through that because it's something we see on TV so often.
Absolutely. It's a lot of thinking on your feet. Like you have to be able to adapt pretty quickly. I would say that I have always, before a game, like a list of fallback questions for interviews because I normally know, like, okay, I'm going to do one player interview, one coach interview, and then maybe one of the two for another part of the game. And each interview is maybe like three questions. So, like, if anything happens and this game is really bad or the team is losing, I have these really basic base level questions that no matter what, I know I can ask and it'll still be a good question. Like a question, something along the lines of maybe something that happened last week and be like, okay, like what's the mentality in the locker room after that? Or what was the coach's message going into this game? Those are all kind of evergreen questions that while I don't feel as good about them because they're not like new and unique, they're still going to get the job done and kind of get them speaking to me. And then on top of that, I'm like, okay, the whole quarter or period, whatever I'm working on, is going to be spent thinking, okay, this is something that happened. This player is playing really well, so it's probably who I'm going to be talking to. Let me note this down in my notes. So if I do, I can refer back to this specific moment. They're going to know what I'm talking about. The people watching are going to know what I'm talking about. And this could really kind of give insight into the player's mind that you wouldn't get just by watching a play unfold. So a lot of my questions, if I can swing it and have note of it, will kind of be of that capacity. I like hearing, I know a lot of people dislike the like, how are you feeling question or like, tell me what you're thinking because they're very open-ended. But I like that style of question just phrased a little more specifically. I think that it's so important to kind of understand where a player is coming from or like how they're viewing the world basically when the world is the field or the rink or whatever. Um, so it's a good combination of kind of making things up literally in the moment and hoping that it makes sense. And also being prepared ahead of time with here's the kind of structure of question that I want.
And yeah, some of those general questions, they can provide some of the most thoughtful answers, especially in the heat of the moment, both good and bad, depending on the outcome of the game. And I'm curious if you have any favorite stories you worked on or even favorite interviews you've had throughout your time as a reporter.
Oh, that's such a good question. Hmm. I would say, actually, I'm gonna bring it back to Sacred Heart again. I feel like it's all looping back to where I started. I kind of mentioned the women's hockey interview that I did for the newspaper. And that was actually my first time working with either of the hockey teams at Sacred Heart, which I mentioned I ended up doing a lot more of before I left. But I interviewed the head coach of the women's hockey team at the time, in preparation for the new arena that was being built there. And I remember very vividly, it was like one of my first times interviewing anybody for like a piece of writing. And it was over the phone. And I was just so nervous. I was like, what if I don't ask the right questions? Like, what if this isn't what if it isn't a good story? Like it's something that's going to be covered because this arena was a pretty big deal at the time, for the school. And I remember being on the phone with him, and the first thing that I just needed to do was just I started chatting with him. And he is a very open and chatty guy. He's great. A great coach, great guy. And we just were talking about I don't even honestly remember the topic, just anything and everything, just to kind of open up a little bit. And it wasn't even at that point getting him comfortable. It was also getting me comfortable with him and kind of understanding his vibe and how I could approach asking him questions. And I just remember everything kind of falling into place, like at the same time. It, I don't know quite how to explain it besides that, of just like, all the nerves of not knowing what to say or thinking that what I had to say maybe didn't matter as much just kind of went away. And when I ended up finishing up the interview, I remember there was just, it ended up being the headline of the article that he had had a couple of really good quotes throughout that. And I just felt so proud at the end and kind of so at peace with the fact that this is something that I could do and be good at. And it's always like going to stick in the back of my head, like kind of for the rest of my career, whether or not I'm doing like technical journalism or what I'm doing now, which is a little more content media based. Um, I'll just always remember like my first like official interview because it turned into, as you mentioned, with my media page, something that I've done so much more of and just become more and more comfortable with as time went on. That was back in like September of 2022. And where are we now? Like January of 2026. So 3.5 years later, and still kind of having that feeling every single time that I interview someone and get to work in this field is something pretty special.
Sometimes all you need is that kind of assurance from someone kind of in a position like that, or like a mentor to just give you that boost to keep on going. And while I'm interviewing you, I like to ask about how you interview other people. And I'm curious how you built those skills over time. Like, how did you build that up? Like, what kind of things did you notice you evolving with as you move forwards?
Definitely. I would say this is probably what anyone going into this field is going to hear from day one, but just like reps and practice, the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. And I think that for me, the biggest struggle was feeling, especially with on-camera interviewing, it's a little bit different when you're just asking questions that are going to be written down. It's a little less, you can feel a little more comfortable. But when I started doing interviews on camera, I started out very stiff. And it's something I still struggle with sometimes to this day of feeling like I have to be so like stiff back, proper, like holding my microphone properly and all that. And that's something very unnatural. People are going to watch that kind of an interview and be like, I don't relate to this. Like, she looks like very nervous, very uncomfortable. And I think that that's something that I think I've probably noticed the most progress on with myself. Because as you can tell, I like to talk. So that's never ever been an issue for me. But just being able to translate the fact that I'm confident in my abilities enough to like be comfortable on camera talking to coaches, players, anyone really, um, is something that took me a long time to kind of figure out and get to that point. I would say like my first probably year of doing interviews on camera, I look back on them now and I'm like, I look like I would rather be anywhere else, which was so untrue. I loved what I was doing. Um, so kind of seeing the growth of my first interviews, which on camera would have been baseball in 2022, kind of a sideline filmed on a phone, all the way to being like on SNY broadcast for hockey or being on New Haven broadcast for football or anything at ASU. It's cool to see that side by side and just see how much I grew like visually in being able to communicate with the people I'm with on camera, but also being able to communicate to the audience that I belong here. I know what I'm talking about, and like I love to be here and I'm comfortable doing
Podcasts love people who love to talk. So if there's one thing that never apologize for on a
it.
podcast, it would be liking to talk too much. And I'm curious, you kind of mentioned that side by side of working on these different networks. Have you noticed anything different about the different networks you've been able to be a part of? I know the industry procedures kind of line up most of the time, but I'm curious if different broadcasts gave you different challenges or things you needed to prepare for.
I would say yes, but not in the format way. I
Mhm.
would say that it's just really kind of adapting to the group of people that you're working with. When I'm on camera, a lot of the times I'm kind of coming in to a group of people that have been doing this together for a really long time, and it can be hard to not feel like the odd one out, and kind of have a few moments of like, okay, like I have to kind of prove myself to belong here. Moral of the story, I've already proved myself. That's how I'm here, you know? So it kind of, you have to get rid of that mentality really quickly. And then after that, it's really just adapting to whatever the vibe is in front of me. I think that that's part of what's made me so successful in this industry in my own right is that I'm very adaptable and I'm very personable. So I don't really struggle to fit in with a crowd of people um, on the outside. And I think that that makes me able to kind of do all these different broadcasts with different people and different people running it and take instruction really well. That's another big part is everyone, especially on a broadcast, is going to tell you how they want things done a little bit differently because everyone has their own style and their own taste. That can take a minute to kind of adjust to and understand that honestly, at the end of the day, it's not about me. It's not about the way I'm doing my job, but it is about what the best thing for this particular sport or this particular broadcast is. Um, that can be a little bit of a learning curve in terms of switching between, again, like a different sport or a different group of people or a different director. Or even as a sideline reporter, different broadcasters kind of understanding when it's my time to come in, when it's my time to be quiet. Um, but I think that just by kind of sitting back and being able to listen and observe and just be willing to take correction and not take things super personally, it's not as intimidating as it feels in the first 5 minutes of being introduced to like a new situation.
And what would you describe your style as?
Oh, chaotic. But not in a bad way. I think that chaos is a little bit like overbranded as bad. Um, I think that outwardly sometimes I can feel a little bit all over the place, but it's just because my mind works like a million miles an hour trying to like make connections and think of different things that I could kind of take into my broadcast and like make things happen with. Um, but I also like to think that I'm very like on top of it at the same time. I think it comes from being a little bit talkative and extroverted. Is just it seems like all of my thoughts are on the outside sometimes. Especially when we're not actually like live, if it's just like talking behind the scenes. Um, but I also think that my like excitement for what I do every day and like my commitment to making everything I do be the best that it can be comes through at the same time as just, oh my gosh, this girl has a lot to think about and a lot to say. I think that it also comes through as she wants to be here. Like, this is something that's important to her. And so we're going to help her make this like good and make sure everything is done well.
A scrum in a hockey game where football players diving for a fumble is chaotic. So I think these sports already bring a good nature of chaos. So I think that you adding on top of it only elevates. I'm curious, have you been able to do any broadcasting like play by play?
Yes, but not for a long time. I will say that for me, I prefer to be on the analyst side.
Mm,
I like to kind of be able to think through my words a little bit before I speak them.
mm,
I did, I'm going to plug ASU's grads program for a second. I had the opportunity in grad school to take a semester long play-by-play class as an elective. And it was with Matt McConnell, who at the time was the play-by-play for the Arizona Coyotes, but now the Utah Mammoth. And he was our professor. And he really did an incredible job of breaking down how play-by-play works, and kind of how you have to do it. We went through every sport. We had to do demo reels for every sport, every major sport in the US. Um, he thought that I could do it. I didn't feel it like I could do it at all, especially not hockey. It's really hard. Have you ever tried play-by-play for hockey? It's a little bit crazy. Um, so it's definitely something that I've thought about trying, and I did for a baseball game once, but can confidently say it's not my favorite thing in the whole world.
yeah, I was gonna say because it's such a different beast compared to these other things because it's so reactionary where you have to constantly be thinking, let's just say like for a football game, let's just use for example, you have to be thinking about things before the play and then reacting just as the play is happening and then be able to analyze what just happened right after play just happened as the next play is being set up. So it's all of these things you have to be aware of. I'm just curious about how in your experience with it, how you've kind of accessed different parts of your brain, if that's the way to phrase it, to find that.
Yeah, like I mentioned, my broadcast style could also be just like kind of blacking out and just hoping that I do well, and then I'm prepared enough. But in terms of the different positions and unlocking the different parts, I do actually think that I could be a decent person to speak on that. I think that part of the reason that play by play was so difficult for me was exactly what you said, but I also think it was partially that you have to understand how to tell things less when you're doing it, if that makes any sense.
Mm,
So, like, people, at least on a TV broadcast, they're watching what's going on in front of them, right? Like, they're seeing it. You don't have to say every single time the puck moves. You're just trying to supplement the general picture, and you have to be able to understand when you're supposed to talk and when you're not. I was not the best at that. That was something that was hard to access for me because I felt like I had to be explaining all the time. When I'm on an analyst side and I'm able to have kind of follow the cues of the play-by-play announcer as well as the cues of the game itself, that allows me a little bit more freedom and leeway to like know exactly when I'm coming into a certain situation and then be able to break down what I saw in a way that maybe people didn't see on their own the first time instead of just saying exactly what's happening on the screen. And then as a sideline reporter, it's totally accessing that like storyteller part of someone who grew up like me as someone who loved to write and like loved to tell stories. That's like that manifesting in a broadcast career. So it really is like three different roles and three different parts of who you are as a broadcaster or reporter. Um, and it can be really difficult to switch between the three, especially for the same sports. I would say that for the most part, my analyst role has been mainly hockey and softball, whereas my sideline roles have been like more football, volleyball, sports I'm maybe a little less familiar with on a technical level, but can still do something fun with um, by telling a story.
And I know a sport you've become very familiar with is golf, with your current role from Connecticut to Arizona, now to Texas. Tell us about your current job for the Southern Texas PGA.
Oh, yes. So like I said, I'm a digital content coordinator down here in Southern Texas, and it's a really big event-based job. So it's office job, of course, because everything is in sports. That's something that they don't tell you, that
Mhm.
most of them have office backings, but also get to travel to tournaments. And what I love about my job is I kind of get to bring together everything that I love about sports and it's like in one role. So I get to do photography, I get to do videography, I get to do graphic design, I get to talk to people, I get to talk to athletes, like I get to interview people. And it all kind of comes together into one like stable career, which I think is so great. And I've been so lucky to kind of find a role that I was able to adjust to and fall into so quickly in a sport that, like you said, I didn't
Mhm.
work in golf my whole time in college. This wasn't something that I was super familiar with going into this job. And it's just been such a fun thing to like learn and experience in the past couple months. And I cannot wait to see where this year takes me on it.
And it's interesting because I know it wasn't just hockey, but a lot of hockey. Hockey's the fastest moving sport to golf, the slowest moving sport. What was that? What was adapting to the sport of golf like?
It really has been more of a learning curve than I'd expect, but you're right, that's like the exact reason. But I've kind of found and come to appreciate the slowness of golf because it really gives you the time to like make things different and kind of do some more fun, creative things. Like hockey, especially action time, like is just go, go, go the whole time. You're gonna get a lot of the same content, a lot of the same shots, especially since you can't really move around so frequently. But with golf, I can adjust my angle between everyone who's teeing off. Like I can drive a golf cart to a different hole and get a whole different background. Like sometimes there'll be trees, sometimes there's going to be like a lake in the middle of the golf course, and it's just something that's really fun to experiment with and like create a whole gallery of different pieces.
And what's the move been like to Texas compared to? Because I know you said some differences in Arizona to Connecticut. What's all the how's each place different from each other?
Oh yeah. Radically
Mhm.
different, I would say. Biggest thing, and I brought this up in my job interview in Texas. I would say the biggest changes between all three have been the weather. They're all crazy different. We were chatting a little bit before this, I said, but I had no idea how cold and windy Texas could get in the winter because, my
Mhm.
Connecticut brain, I'm thinking, oh, it's gonna be warm down there the whole time. No, it's not that. But besides that, I think that it's just a whole different culture to kind of understand and get used to. And from a professional perspective, you really have to understand the community that you're living in and understand how people tick and how everything works in order to properly do your job. Especially from my end on now as a social media professional, like you really have to understand like okay, what's going to work in this community that wouldn't work back home? Like, what's not going to work here that would work back home? And things like that. And I think that honestly, just like experiencing, like going out and experiencing the way people are, like talking to people at tournaments. I love to talk to parents when I can, because I work a lot in junior golf. So I like to talk to the parents while their kids are competing, like get to know them, get to know the kids, kind of get to know what questions I can ask them for like fun little content and figure out some stories and things like that. And just kind of grow my understanding of this community that I found myself a part in, and then understand how that can reflect into the work that I'm doing and like to best represent them because it's all about them. It's not about me. That's, I think, another big part of something that you have to understand about working in sports is that, like, at the end of the day, if I'm not playing, it really has nothing to do with me. I'm here to promote the sport, the athletes. Like, it's their story. I'm just kind of the vessel that's like putting it out there for them.
And pushing that story forward. And I'm also
Exactly.
curious how you're able to adapt to working in social media now, since you have so much of a background in broadcasting. I know so many of these skills are transferable. I'm curious what it's like now, kind of running a social media.
Yeah, I love it because there are still opportunities for me to be kind of on camera. When I was in broadcasting, I know a pretty traditional route for a sports reporter, a journalist is kind of working in a smaller news station after graduation and then moving up to like a bigger market news station and making a name for yourself there and then maybe moving into a city and doing it. And I kind of knew from the jump that that wasn't the path that I wanted to take even if I did want to go into broadcasting, like professionally as my only thing. And something about the other path is that you really need to get your foot in the door with a skill that's not just your voice or not just your knowledge. Like a lot of smaller teams, you have to be, okay, you're the broadcaster, but you also do sales. Like you're the broadcaster, but you also do marketing. And that's something that was really important to me. I like to be well-rounded in what I do and be able to kind of take on any role that's given to me. But as I kind of went through my time at Arizona State reporting, um, I kind of fell in love with the marketing side of things and being able to be a little more behind the scenes. I got a little burnt out of being in front of everyone all the time because it can be very public. And for me, I'm a perfectionist. I like things to be perfect, and that's something that can be really hard to achieve on a live broadcast. And that was something that added a lot of stress to me. Like the preparation just kind of felt it kind of was turning into something that was more like an checking a box versus something I really was loving and enjoying doing. And I knew at that point that it was time to kind of shift my perspective and maybe trying a different part of sports was going to be more up my alley while I kind of brought that back. So I think that being able to do the social media while also sometimes being on camera and then being able to kind of freelance on the side if I want to and work like a broadcast at a local school or something like that has been my way of kind of keeping my foot in all the doors that could be open in my future. I'm only 22. I'm turning 23 pretty soon. So I'm like, I have so much time in my life to figure out where I want my like final career stop to be. And right now I'm just kind of enjoying being able to do really whatever it is that like makes me happy in any moment.
Wearing different hats has been your forte in your career so far, so that makes a lot of sense. And I'm also curious, like you mentioned, freelancing. Do you mind elaborating a bit on that, what a freelance broadcaster looks like?
Oh yeah. So you brought up my media page before, and that's
Mm.
actually been like a huge part of things that have come to me. It's also been, as I mentioned, like making connections. Most of my freelance roles have come from either someone that I've worked with, kind of in passing broadcasting, or someone that I met like off chance at a game or something, doing something totally different that emails me down the line and is like, "Hey, are you interested in doing a couple games for this?" Um, that's also how I got my freelance social media contracts. I've done a little bit of that as well. It's just been all getting these jobs through people that I've come across doing my job. And that's why it's so important to like always kind of have a friendly face on, be open to meeting new people because you never know down the line what door that's going to open for you. I've had multiple broadcasters that I've worked with really closely who have been able to recommend me to schools that they work with, which has allowed me to get into those schools specifically, then more sports at that school, then find a different school. So that's mainly been where any freelance thing has come from, is just like knowing who you know and then letting them know you and like you're vouching for yourself and your talent through them.
Networking, like you
Oh,
said.
yes.
Yeah, the word communication students know all too well. It's not who you know, it's who knows you, and that's how you build this great network and meet all these incredible people and do all these incredible things. And I'm curious, kind of through all of these experiences, what advice you would have to, let's say, a student who wants to work in sports media but can feel overwhelmed by how competitive it is and how difficult it may look to break in.
It is an incredibly competitive industry, and it can be very disheartening to feel like there's so many people who are just as good as you are and just as like passionate as you are going for the same kind of things. But I think that for me, what's helped a lot is kind of reframing it. I don't view it as a competition. I view it as like letting the people around me that I could be competing with are going to make me better. That's why it's so important to me to like talk to people. So that would be my advice. I've recommended like paths and places for so many, specifically girls, have come to me and asked me for advice to kind of get where I am. And I would never, ever, ever want to like gatekeep or be an obstacle in their career because I think that the more people who are passionate that come into this job field, like the better it's going to be for everybody involved. So my advice is just always like keep an open mind, always keep an open heart, and always keep like open eyes to everything that's going on and just be willing to be friendly. Don't be cutthroat. Like you can be out for yourself because obviously at the end of the day it's your career and that's what you want to do. But you can also do that while growing and uplifting alongside the people in the community. And that's something that can be really easily overlooked when you just are so desperate to like break in and get a job. Because the biggest benefits that I've ever seen have come from like being close and getting friendly with people in this industry. And that's opened doors that like I never would have known they would have opened until like years later.
Your peers don't always have to be your rivals.
Exactly.
Kind of like you've said before, there's a power in being personable, a power in reaching out to others, and like we said, building out those networks, and you never know where they'll take you. But to take us further into this interview, Grace, I'd like to ask you some kind of fun questions about you. What's something people might not know about you, like fun facts?
Oh, well, I kind of went over my normal one is that a lot of people don't know that I was a fencer growing up.
On
Um,
guard.
yeah, exactly. I don't speak French though, so that doesn't help. Um, I would say that something people don't know a lot about me is that I actually went to a private school with only 10 kids in my grade growing up.
Wow.
So that was always really fun. But I grew up in Western Massachusetts before I moved to Connecticut. And so I understand kind of what it's like to come from like a little more remote background to like what I ended up coming to in Connecticut, which was a very like big and bustling atmosphere. Um, so I know what it's like to go through like a small town adjustment to get to like a bigger area.
And I think that kind of moving helped to widen your perspective and also meet different people, I'm sure, which only makes you
100%.
better interacting with different people. And to kind of continue onwards, I'd like to ask you, what's one thing you love and one thing you strongly dislike, just in general?
Oh, okay. I'm gonna avoid sports related because I feel like that would be too easy. Um, One thing I love is I love music. Besides sports, it's something that I'm like most passionate about is like listening, going to concerts, listening to music all the time. This is actually a better fun fact about me, but my like Spotify listening minutes last year were 170,000 minutes,
Wow.
which a lot of people get very surprised about. And then one thing that I dislike, this is hard because I like to say that there's not a lot in the world that I dislike. I like to see benefits and things because I'm cliche like that. Um, I don't like tomatoes on my sandwiches. Maybe that's a big one. I'm just not a fan. It's not very good, but I do love tomato sauce on a pizza because I'm not crazy.
And what kind of music do you listen to?
I listen to just about everything, but being in Texas recently, I've been very much on the country kick,
Mm,
because you kind of have to be down here.
mm.
But besides that, I'm big fan of classic rock, big fan of pop, big fan of classical instrumentals. Honestly, anything that's like pleasant sounding that I can listen to when I'm working, I'm sold.
Yeah, what fills up all those Spotify minutes? And you mentioned yourself being cheesy. I'll rival you in being cheesy and ask you this question. What are some of your hopes and dreams professionally or in general?
Yeah, this is actually one that I have a straight answer to for once.
Mm,
My biggest goal has always been to work for the New York Rangers professionally, in whatever capacity that ends up being, whether it's social media or in some kind of broadcast manner. My whole life has kind of been, or at least my whole career has been towards working in hockey in New York. So that's the be all end all goal for me professionally. Um, so everything, every step that I take in my life, while amazing as I enjoy it in the moment, is kind of building to hopefully that moment someday.
So, making your way back to hockey, making your way back to the Northeast, and kind of bringing with you more experience and something you could bring to, I assume, your favorite team.
Exactly. Always full circle.
Exactly, exactly. And I'd also like to ask, what are some of your favorite movies and why they resonate with you?
I'm gonna commit a cardinal sin, maybe. I'm not a huge movie person. I don't watch a lot of movies. I watch more TV shows. I would say that long term, I'm a big rom-com person, however cheesy that is. So I would say that one of my favorite movies would probably be like 10 Things I Hate About You or something. Just because if I am gonna sit and watch a movie, I want it to be like a good script and something that's like a
Mhm,
little bit escapist, right? I want something that's not as serious as my day-to-day life is.
mhm.
Um, I would, it's a hard question because I feel like there's so many movies that I just like that I've seen that I love it.
What
All the
about your
ones that
favorite
I've seen.
shows?
Favorite shows, I watch Prime TV a lot. But currently some of my favorite shows are like The West Wing, which is a little
Mhm.
bit of a throwback, and then Shrinking on Apple TV has been very good. I don't know if you've seen it, but
Yeah, I've heard great things, and overall, we talked about some great things on this episode, Grace. I want to thank you so much for your time, and I also want to ask if you have any motivational words or plugs or anything you want to leave the audience with.
yeah, I would say that maybe my biggest motivation and the thing I carry through my day-to-day life is that like no matter how bad that your day feels, like there's always the possibility for something good to come out of it. Whatever you're going through and struggling with in a given moment, there's always going to be something on the flip side that's a little bit brighter if you look for it. And I think that that's something that makes it a little bit easier to get through kind of the harder days and remember why it is you do what you do. And also just remembering that if you're in this kind of a field, you have to be in it because you love it. And just whatever reminds you that you're in sports because you love to work in sports, whatever that may be, whether it's stepping back and watching your favorite team or like talking to people you work with, like just always make sure to remind yourself that you're here because you love it and you're passionate about it, and no other reason matters at the end of the day.
And I applaud your passion. I appreciate you sharing just this journey in terms of I applaud your ability your versatility in this field and the way that you've approached sports media from so many different sides and that you've been able to have all of these different experiences. And thank you for sharing it with us today and kind of giving us an insight into this fun world that we often see but don't realize just how much goes into it. So thank you so much, Grace.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I've loved talking to you. So.
Of course, same here. And as always, this is Ryan Ziaks with the Zicast, where everyone has a story. Signing off. Thank you so much for watching.